Joe Bulig, I am literally looking you in the eyeball right now.
This is really weird.
This is the very first live Bookworm recording. Just to prove that it's live, here's a live high five.
Woohoo!
Not a sound effect.
Yeah, we'll see how this goes. Mike and I have got together, what's it been, a couple days ago now? So we've spent a couple days together. So it's been kind of fun, hanging out, going through some bookworm stuff, doing some work on the faith-based productivity site. It's been a good time, but it is kind of weird to be in your office.
Yeah, you've helped me out a lot with the faith-based productivity stuff, which people are going to find out more about in a little bit because we're getting ready to kick it off and launch the course. You've been helping me out with the community aspect of it. So I don't want to give out too many details about that right now because it's not publicly joinable, I guess. Well, technically it is, but we haven't really done anything with it. So keep that under wraps for now. But we do have an exciting announcement for the Bookworm community. We are testing this right now, but another thing we've done while you've been here at my house, in my office, you've literally been in my office, you've been sleeping in my office, is we have figured out, you have figured out, I have figured out how to press the button to start it.
This has got lots of disclaimers on it today.
But this is a test live recording. So we are broadcasting this live. We didn't share the link because we weren't sure that it was going to work and we didn't want to disappoint a bunch of people. But hopefully, if this goes well, this will be coming to the Bookworm Premium membership soon.
Yeah, hopefully the next time we record, we will have it on the schedule. We'll make it known to the community, to the club. And if you are a premium member and you want to listen live, there'll be a chat involved with it. It'll be a good time. So we're doing some test run on it right now as we're recording this one. And I think your wife might be listening in right now upstairs. So if you are, hi, Rachel. And next time we record, we're going to try to get it on the club, and premium members can listen in live. So you get kind of the pre-scoop before everything gets published.
It will be like sitting in my office watching Joe and I record, except no one will be in my office except for me again.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not staying that long.
All right, so a couple other things here for follow-up before we get into today's book, which I know we've been trying to not talk about this while you've been here, because I know you've got thoughts, I've got thoughts.
I have strong opinions about this book.
Yeah, well, hang on to those for just a second. We're going to mention one more time the Bookworm shirts, because this is the time if you want to show your support for Bookworm at Macstock. Now is the time to get your shirt, because it does take a while for them to print and to be delivered. The shirts are great. There's both t-shirts and sweatshirts, though it's getting to be not sweatshirt weather anymore. But if you want to buy one for the fall, or you live somewhere even colder than Wisconsin, that's fine. You could do that too. Macstock, I mentioned, this is happening at the end of July. I will be speaking. Joe will be there. And a bunch of our friends will be there as well. MPU is going to be recording live. And there's a couple people who are going to be speaking for the first time, including our buddy Josh. So I'm excited to see that. If you do want to come to Macstock and you haven't gotten a ticket yet, you can use the coupon code that they gave me to save a bunch of money at this point, because the early bird is gone. So the code FOCUSED at checkout will get you $70 off the ticket price and basically get you the early bird price still, if you want to go to Macstock and you have been dragging your feet.
That's a pretty good deal. I didn't realize they got that much off, but that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it was a little bit extra off of the early bird prior to that disappearing, but as we're recording this, it disappeared about a week ago. So now it is effectively getting you early bird price for using that code. So it's a significant chunk of change if you decide after that deadline is passed that you do want to go. And we would love to see you. We've got a whole bunch of stuff. I keep buying more stuff.
He needs to stay off a sticker mule. He needs to.
That's true. I get those emails with like a new product or some crazy special, and I'm like, hey, I bet we could make some cool Bookworm stuff out of that. So we got, as you were here, delivered bumper stickers, which are actually pretty cool.
I took a look at these things like, okay, I'm not a bumper sticker person, but gosh, I want these things.
It's not just bumper stickers, though, as you have in your possession now the pins that we had previously discussed, which you were earnestly longing for.
This is one of the things I was looking forward to the most about coming to see you, Mike.
What's the pins that I had in my possession?
Totally, just the pins, Bookworm pins. That was the main draw.
Cool. I also gave you about 200 more bookmarks.
I'm not through the last set.
Yeah, I got way too many bookmarks. And we've also got stickers, I believe. So I'm going to have all of this stuff with me at Macstock because that is a logical place to give it away so it doesn't just sit in my closet. But we got tons of stuff. And so if you are a listener, definitely come say hi. We want to meet you, first of all. And then don't be shy about asking for things because chances are I will have lots of stuff.
And he needs to give a bunch away. And I need to give a bunch away. So please hunt us down.
Yep. And there will be a link in the show notes if you want to buy a Macstock ticket. There's no special link. Just remember to use the code FOCUS if you want to save $70 on the weekend pass. We do have a couple of action items to follow up on from our last book. We've got, for me, Ask More Questions. This was kind of specifically for my one-on-ones that I do with my kids, and that did happen. I don't really consider this to be done, though. I think this is something that I need to continue to do and continue to keep an eye on. Again, this is one of those like presence equals success action items for me. So technically, I guess it's done, but it's still going to be, there's still going to be more to do with this.
Sure. Now, is this one of those things where like you get together with each of your kids, like you do one-on-ones with your kids each week, and then you're just trying to be more intentional about probing and asking, what's going on in life, that sort of thing.
Yep.
That's the intent?
Exactly. Yep. And really just when you're getting together with other people, even just asking more questions, how are they doing, rather than just talking about what you're doing, which is why it's been kind of weird for me while you've been here, Joe, because basically you've been like, hey, how can I help you? And I don't like being the subject of attention.
So I spun it on you. And
yes, but I am very appreciative for your help. I can't wait for people to see the community. The other thing I've got here is to identify my own restorative niches, whatever.
I call them niches.
I didn't really get a chance to do this. My whole world has kind of been turned upside down lately, which we kind of talked about. I'm not sure how much I want to share here, but
probably shouldn't.
Things are happening, and now is not the time to figure out how to back away from things, if that makes sense, I guess. So this is kind of on pause for me. I do know that this crazy season is not going to last forever. And at that point, I've got to figure out something that can kind of help me restore a sense of balance. But if I would have tried to do this last week, it would have been a complete disaster. So
no, I want to push back on that a little bit because this is similar to one of my action items, which was to determine daily time for respite.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of see this restorative niches process of being very similar to that. So a question mark I would have for you is, instead of seeing that as like some longer term, like multiple hours or multiple days,
mm-hmm.
where you're getting away or trying to restore yourself, trying to find like 20 to 30 minutes a day, as opposed to those longer term spells, just because even through the crazy periods, like that's huge.
Yeah. No, I understand. And it's kind of hard to explain without getting into a whole bunch of details, but basically everything I know is wrong for a lot of my world at the moment.
Yep.
And I'm kind of along for the ride. Again, I'll share more details when I can. It's good things, but now is not the time where I can say, well, I need 30 minutes a day of alone time, and this is the thing I'm going to be doing.
Right.
Because stuff's just happening, and that's kind of the season that I'm in. Now, as we're recording this, Faith-Based Productivity launches in a couple of weeks, and some other things happen in a couple of weeks. And that kind of establishes a new normal for me, which, again, I'll share details when I can. But I'm hesitant to try to figure out ways to hack the current system when it's going to be blown up completely.
Right.
That's really my point. But I agree with you that this is something that needs to happen. I just have no idea what it even looks like anymore. I thought I had an idea when I put this on the action items, but ever since then, it's kind of been a whirlwind.
Sure. I have one other action item here, and that is to spend less time in my pseudo extrovert mode. I suppose we didn't mention these 4 come from the book Quiet by Susan Cain, where we were talking about introversion. And, obviously, I think if you have listened to us for very long, you know that Mike and I are both introverts. And whenever we spend time in these extroverted modes, it doesn't always go well long term. Now, granted, whenever I go on trips, I have a tendency to fall into this extrovert mode more. It just kind of ends up being the way the things operate. But I know that that's just a temporary thing. But I have been, like, from a long-term, like a day-to-day stance, I've been doing pretty well with this. So, although this trip doesn't do me too well in that regard, Mike, it has been pretty good overall.
Cool. So should we jump into today's book?
Yes, I've been waiting a few days to do this.
All right. So today's book is How to Take Smart Notes by Sönke Ahrens. And I mentioned last time that there was a video. Did you watch the video?
I didn't.
Okay.
Intentionally.
I think maybe that's okay. I think maybe that's better, actually.
Okay, sure.
Not that there was really anything wrong with the video, but definitely not my style. This book was recommended, and it quickly jumped to the top of the recommendations in the Bookworm Club. And it's interesting. It's broken down into a couple different sections, but it's not the standard breakup of a lot of the types of books that we read. In fact, a lot of the systems pieces of this you can get just from the introduction. And then the rest of the book, he kind of expounds on some of those things. And there's some nuggets in there. And he talks about a lot of productivity principles and things that some of them we've mentioned on the show before. Some of them we haven't. So we'll dive into some of those. But I don't know. I can see how a case could be made for this being the book form that it is. A case could also be made that this should be a blog post.
Yeah. So one of the first things I have a tendency to notice, we've talked about books a little bit since I've been here with Mike and his family. And one of the first things I noticed, if you look at the spine of this book, it looks fine, but there's a couple very telling things. Now, you shouldn't judge a book by a cover, as they say. But one thing I noticed is there is no publisher mark. So this is a self-published book.
Yep.
Number 2, if you look at another book, you notice that the titles are reversed from this one.
Yeah, it doesn't fit on the bookshelf unless you put it upside down.
They screwed up the printing on it.
Yeah.
Which did not start me off too well.
I was wondering if you were going to notice that.
It really, really irked me. Being someone who likes things to line up cleanly, like that it bothered me. And that was before I even opened the thing. Like I hadn't even gotten into it yet. I think we need to go into a little bit about what this system is before the rest of my thoughts can really come out on this, because I have some strong opinions against this book, and yet I like it, which is weird. So I'm kind of struggling with this. I will note on the back of this, now this is one thing that endeared me right away. Most of the time, whenever you hear people talk about software, or like they're referencing tools and stuff in these books, they'll give you tools that work on Windows, they'll give you tools that work on Mac. This guy notes Windows, Mac, or Linux on the back of this, which immediately endeared me to him. It's like, oh, he's willing to mention Linux. Okay, this might be my kind of thing. So I was very torn. It's like, okay, he mentions Linux, but they screwed up the printing on the book. So I wasn't real sure what to do with that.
Yeah. So let's jump into the content itself, I guess, with the introduction here. And the introduction, he talks about a couple different things, the big one being the slip box. And he credits kind of this whole book to this method that was developed by a German guy, Niklas Luhmann, I believe is how you say his name. And essentially what he did is he had this system which allowed him to write papers and publish books really fast. So this is kind of through the lens of academia. He used his slipbox to not only write a thesis in a year and enter academia as a professor of sociology at the University of Bielefeld, I think is how you say that. But in 30 years, he published 58 books and hundreds of papers. So this guy is a pretty prolific writer, and he basically says that this slipbox system that he created, this is the reason he's able to do what he does. So that's kind of amazing, right at the beginning, but it's not too complicated. Basically what he does is he reads things, and then he writes his ideas on index cards, puts the bibliographical information on one side, and then any personal notes about that thing on the other side. And he would number them so he could group things together. And then whenever it came time to write, he would take these cards, which he had put in this little slip box, and he'd just thumb through them and find one that he wanted to write on. And then he had a whole bunch of interconnected ideas, and the paper basically wrote itself is kind of the idea.
Now, a question for you. As you were reading through this book, were you able to put together very quickly what this system is?
Kind of. I think I understand what it is. I don't think I would do it exactly that way. It just doesn't make sense.
So one of the key components that Luhmann had with his whole process is like a numbering system. Every card had an ID number. And he had a whole process for putting new notes in the box, in the slip box, behind other notes that those ideas connected to, and then if they connected to multiple notes, he had a whole system of numbering to help you determine where those processes were, which is really cool. But he also mentions in this book, Sönke, he mentions that he had kind of two slip boxes, that one of them was for citations, the other one was for the ideas themselves.
Right.
And then at other points, he mentions like these starting points, like an index note that helped you get to certain areas within the slip box. All of that's fine and well, but I kind of struggled with it because he didn't spell that out in one place. Like he has this area where he says like everything you need to do this system, but it's actually spread out through the whole book, which is a thing that I really, really struggled with. I was like, it felt like he was trying to sit down and tell us what the system is and then didn't entirely. He kind of just alluded to it. And it frustrated me enough that I actually put the book down after the first, I think, 4 chapters, after he went through the area where I thought he should go through the system. Got really frustrated because I couldn't figure out what the thing was. And I did some research on a Zettelkasten, I think is how you say that, which is kind of the name that's been attributed to this whole process. And I learned more by doing a few quick Google searches, actually DuckDuckGo searches, to determine what that system was. So I don't know where to go from there, but that the book was just kind of a jumping off point for me to figure out what was going on with it, because I felt like he didn't justify he didn't do a really clear, didn't give us a clear explanation of what that system looked like.
True. And I also think that having to manually draw or write the numbers and the related ideas with them kind of takes the magic out of the system for me, because if you're going to be moving things around then and you decide something should be somewhere else, you have to erase that or write over it,
right,
and put something else. So as he was describing that, I was like, man, this would be way easier with a digital tool. And he recommends a digital tool, but I don't recommend you take his recommendation for the digital tool. How do you say the name of this? I know you looked at it.
Zettelkasten.
Okay, so this is basically a digital tool which is designed to follow this system. And actually, this is not the first time that I had heard of this tool. I remember looking at this back in the day when I heard about it somewhere else, and I cannot for the life of me remember where I heard about it. I went to the website to maybe download this app and take a look at it, and the entire website is in German, so I can't read anything. And yeah, I could translate it, but at that point, it's obvious that like this is not the type of thing that I want to build a workflow on. So
something like this should not be central to how I do things. Now, one of the aspects that he mentions, and he reiterates this over and over and over again through the whole book, is that the concept is that you work inside this slip box to develop your own ideas about something. and that something could be whatever you want it to be. And we'll get into some of this a little bit later. But the premise of it is that you have serendipitous interactions with your own ideas and make new connections. I think you and I have talked about this before, where some of the greatest ideas are random connections between two dots.
Yep.
And this whole note system is designed to do that. The trick is it's specifically geared towards writing. The whole intent is to be able to publish these thoughts at some point, which I'm not sure how much that applies direct to me, but it is a fascinating concept.
Yeah, and I think there's some truth to that idea. If you have a system that allows you to connect dots easier, then I can see how the process of writing suddenly becomes a lot simpler. And you don't have to be worried about the blank screen. That's kind of his main point at the beginning of this, is that a lot of people hear that saying that the struggle is the blank page or the blank screen. And he's basically saying that if you take good notes, it's not a struggle at all because the system connects the things for you, and all you've got to do is show up and write.
Right.
Again, I wouldn't implement it the way that he's implemented it. And I'm not sure that, even as I've kind of thought on this for a while, that I can get 100% of the way to the destination that he's describing. But I do think that you can get pretty close. And another point I want to call out here is that on page 32, he says that tools are only as good as your ability to work with them. So it's easy to think, well, I just need the perfect tool, which is why people will download Zettelkasten because they hear him talking about it, like, oh, maybe that'll solve my problem.
Sure.
But you really don't need anything fancy. He mentions that there are really only 4 tools that you need. You need something to write with and write on, and he combines it as one tool for some reason. You need a reference management system. You need the slip box itself, and you need an editor, which I presume is where he's saying you're going to be doing your writing. Now, I've kind of thought through that process and what's this going to look like for me. I don't have a real solid definition for the slip box itself, although I have been playing around with an app, which we will talk about probably a little bit later, which maybe will allow me to do this.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try it, mostly because I like the end result concept, and I'm not attributing it to his ability to sell me on it at this point.
Yep.
But I am not interested in any of the tools he recommended. I'm very much a command line Vim user. If you're a Vim user, you have to let me know in the club. Like, you have to find me. I want to know other Vim users in the club, for sure. Hit me up. But yeah, that's a process that I'm going to be trying to implement it. I have most of it in place, the whole hyperlinking between things. Like, I can do all of that there. The trick is like how to find other notes and create those links. So I'm getting close to that point, but yeah, it'll be an interesting process.
For sure. Should we jump into the 4 underlying principles?
Yes.
Okay, so the first one is that writing is the only thing that matters. And this is probably a very polarizing way to start what is really the beginning of the book. But I don't think it's quite as polarizing as maybe it first comes off. And the reason I say that is because he's coming at this from an academia lens. And so at the beginning, he's talking about whether you're a professor, whether you're a student, yada, 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 all these different scenarios where you should be writing. And it's easy to say, well, I'm not a student, I'm not a professor, I have no need to be writing. But I also think that the average person, writing could be very beneficial to them, and they just haven't implemented it yet. Sean McCabe, I know, is a big believer in this. He has done his course, I think it's 30 Days to Better Writing, and basically he says that, whatever you are creating and whatever you are doing, writing is the tool that is going to get you there. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but essentially he's saying that if you can create a writing habit, you can create just about anything. And it's hard sometimes to see the connection between something like this. This is an audio format, right? But there was still writing that went into this. In fact, it's kind of interesting because he's talking about taking better notes for the books that you're reading so you can connect these ideas later. And that's literally what I'm doing for Bookworm with my MindNote files. So I think you need to kind of push past the initial reaction if the title of this first chapter doesn't sit well with you.
Yeah, I would echo that, because I know that, like, although my days are spent on the keyboard, like that's what I do. I do a lot of stuff on the keyboard. Even though that's what I do, it doesn't necessarily mean that I see the prose writing that I do. Like, obviously, a lot of my writing is in code, not to be decrypted in any way. But the writing itself, like, I don't know that I would say that is the only thing that matters in life. I think that he does have a point in saying that, writing is a great way to understand you yourself and what you think about the world. So I think there's still a lot of value in the concept of writing these notes, even if you don't have the intent of publishing it. But to go as far as to say that publishing and writing books is the end-all be-all, not sure I could jump on board with that.
Sure. That's fair. I do think, though, that writing has a lot more value than people realize. And kind of his point from this section is that it causes you, the perspective that you have when you view writing as the primary end, maybe not the only thing that matters. Maybe that's a bad way to say it, but you're approaching a book, let's say, from the lens of, I want to be able to write my own interpretation of this. Or in my case, maybe I want to approach a book as giving me ideas for other blogs and things that I could be writing about. That does change how you approach the book. You can approach a book as just like, well, whatever hits me. And surprise, surprise, you're not really inspired by anything, but if you approach it through a different perspective, which is kind of what we've had to do with Bookworm, is like, I've got to get through this book and I got to be able to understand it so I can talk about it at least a certain level, then I would argue that causes you to get a lot more out of it than if you would just sat down and, well, I guess it's time to read. And I think taking that to the next level is, I'm not just going to read this to understand it, but I'm going to read it to repurpose it. I'm going to take the dots from this book, connect them with some other dots from some other books, different ideas, and create something new out of it. I do think that probably even exponentially increases the number of dots that you collect when you sit down to read a book.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, because I know that he does mention a number of different types of notes, and some of those are literature notes, like notes you're taking about the ideas that you run across while you're reading. Although I felt like I should stop reading the book and start creating those notes as I was reading it, I chose not to. Like, maybe I should have, but I did not. I will say that whenever I've started in on our next book, I have been making some notes with the intent of doing that. No idea what will come of that, but it's an interesting jumping off point.
Right. He does talk about the different types of notes actually in the next chapter or next section. That's another thing. Like these kind of blend together on the same page. There's no real clear delineations.
Well, it was self-published. He's trying to cut back on number of pages, so he didn't finish the page to start a chapter where it should start. He just started the chapter right as the next one or previous one ended.
The exact opposite of every kid in every school ever who increased the margins and the font sizes to try to get their text to fill up the pages.
He was trying to keep it down.
Yeah. But the next chapter is Simplicity is Paramount. And the basic idea here is that you should keep things as simple as you can. Now, he does talk about the 3 different types of notes. Maybe we should talk about these a little bit. Fleeting notes, permanent notes, and project notes. In my definition, I guess fleeting notes are the things that you want to capture right now but don't really matter. Permanent notes are the things that you want to capture right now and you have to make sure that you have access to it later. And project notes are kind of the temporary things that are associated with something that you're working on right now, but you're not going to need them long term. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. So then, again, when you are collecting these ideas, you want to make sure that you collect them in a way that eliminates the friction, both, I would argue, in capturing them in the first place, which is why for this specific piece of it, the first part of his workflow, the tools where you write things down, I continue to use drafts. I know you mentioned you removed it off your phone a while ago.
But it's back.
All right. Good, because drafts is a killer application, and one of the best features is that you can set it so that every time you open the app, there's that blank draft. Now, I'm not opening it ahead of time like you were, so it's ready to go
I still do
to specific things.
I highly recommend just to grab that one real quick. Like if you have drafts on your phone, I do highly recommend building in the muscle memory to launch drafts before you sleep your phone. Because then whenever you unlock your phone, the first thing you're presented with is an open screen to start typing. Absolutely love that.
I get it. It makes sense, but I'm not sure. Maybe I should do it, but that just seems like a bridge too far for me. I mean, the fact that I have to tap the app and it opens and it's ready to type, that's enough of a reduction in friction for me. I like not being able to have to tap the extra button to open up a new sheet. And I get where like the next level of that would be that you just open up your phone and there it is. But that just feels kind of weird to me. But whatever, no judgment.
One point I want to make here is that with this whole slip box concept, and he mentions this in this Simplicity is Paramount section, typically whenever you hear people talk about keeping notes or writing ideas down, they always want to categorize it.
Yeah.
And this whole slip box is designed to break that down. Like it's designed to prevent that. He has a quote here. I'm just going to read this quick. It's on page 41. If you sort by topic, you are faced with the dilemma of either adding more and more notes to one topic, which makes them increasingly hard to find, or adding more and more topics and subtopics to it, which only shifts the mess to another level. I thought that was really interesting because how many times do you hear about people refer to like Evernote notebooks and they don't know how many to create, which ones should they create? Or you refer to people who have writing workflows in Ulysses. Like that's pretty common, but almost everybody wants to categorize and add tags and topics, and like they always want to do that. This is specifically designed to not do that.
Yeah. Well, for sure the topics and the folders, for example, I completely agree with that. I think maybe you could use keywords to replace his numbering system.
Sure, or tags, because I know like the Zettelkasten app that he loves so much that we can't stand. It leverages tags to do that whole serendipitous connections part.
Yeah, well, tags are the interesting evolution of this system, I think, because it's not a one-for-one matching of how you would connect things, but tags are a really convenient way that is supported in just about every application and also in the operating system on Mac and kind of iOS, I guess, but not really. But my point is that it's kind of everywhere. And I think there's a lot of creative ways that you could use tags to filter things and find related ideas. And that's really the shift he wants people to make. He mentions that the old way is you kind of think to yourself, under which topic do I store this note? Which folder does this belong in? And the new way that he's trying to get us to embrace is in which context do I want to be able to stumble upon this again? So as you're thinking about something in the future, where do you like those topics? That's how you should organize things so that things pop up in front of you at the right time. And this is an interesting idea. And again, I think maybe tags is sort of the right way to implement this nowadays, but I don't know that you can get 100% of the way there either. I'm not quite sure what this looks like in my application of it.
Well, I know that towards the beginning, he made a very strong point that he's not referring to a wiki, like a Wikipedia page of sorts, where you've got links that go all sorts of places, and it's ways of finding things. He makes a very clear point that that's not what it is, and yet the more of an explanation I got for it, the more I felt like this is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
So it's just not long for him. The idea is that you have a whole bunch of smaller notes and you're building links from those notes to other notes. Like that was a lot of what I was seeing. And I could see that. One of the questions that I ran across in this process was like, okay, well, that's fine, but how do I get started into this whole system? I don't know if he actually spelled it out very well, but he refers to, or at least people in the Zettelkasten community have a tendency to refer to index notes, and they'll have a single index note that then helps them find topics and jump off of them.
Sounds like the bullet journal.
Yeah, it does. So it felt a lot like that, and I could see that. But, maybe that's a good segue into, the next chapter here. Nobody ever starts from scratch, because with that, everybody has ideas about things in some form or another. If you stop long enough to write out a thought on anything, you can form an opinion on it in some way or another, which is kind of nice because the beauty of this, and something he stresses quite a bit, is you're not doing anything you don't want to do.
Yeah.
You always just go with the topics that seem interesting at the time. And the more time you spend doing that, the more ideas you get in it, the bigger it grows, the more organic it becomes. Everything takes off for amazingness.
Yeah. Well, this section specifically, this kind of gave me a moment of revelation, because he uses a lot of different studies to support his ideas in this book. And he's not alone in that. There's a lot of books in our space that use research studies, whether they have done them themselves or they are citing work that somebody else has done to support an idea. And I remember we had Chris Bailey on, and he talked about how he had access to his fiance's like EBSCO host sort of a thing, where he could look at the academic papers and read them all for himself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself as he was describing that sounds miserable.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm also myself writing more lately, and I find myself writing these ideas, and then in the back of my mind, I'm like, there's a study that I've read about somewhere that is perfect to illustrate what I'm talking about here, but I can't remember what it is.
Right.
So for me, I kind of had this picture of what if, as I was taking these notes and writing about these, like reading these books where they cite these studies, what if I had a slip box where I could tag or whatever, but all of those studies basically were grouped together. And then whenever I needed to go back and support an idea, I could very quickly flip through those, get the gist of them. That's something he talks a lot about. And then if I needed to dig deeper and cite something specific, it's right there for me. I've got maybe 20 different studies, that pop up all the time. So there's 20 of those cards in my system, and I can find the one that I need. And then if I need to, I could dig a little bit deeper, but that would probably save me a lot of time over Googling, okay, what was that one study by the one guy with the radishes, and what was the findings?
Right.
Because that stuff, there have been a handful of those studies, and the more books that we read, the more that we do get exposed to, but you do see the same ones popping up over and over and over again. But I can't for the life of me remember this is what the Dunning-Krieger effect was, or Parkinson's law, or any of that type of stuff. So
do you have a Pinboard account?
I do.
Yeah, I have put off having a Pinboard account for a long time. This book actually prompted me to finally do it, because I run across stuff all the time that I want to store or come back to. So in my mind, what I'm thinking of, because he refers to quite a few tools around maintaining a bibliography and then using that as a way to put sources into your permanent notes that are in the slip box. And although that sounds all grand, I'm not one that really needs to ever create a bibliography.
Right.
But it would be nice to have like a list of sources. And because so many of the sources and the interesting tidbits that I want to refer to are web-based, it made sense to me to have something with a long-term storage, such as Pinboard, that has the archive ability. So I haven't started building all this out yet, but my intent is to take that Pinboard account and grab links to those pins and use that in the slip box as opposed to the real link, because it'll be an offline archive of it.
Sure. Yeah, I think Pinboard, that's an interesting example that I hadn't really thought of. I do have a Pinboard account. I basically just collect interesting things that I want to look at later to my Pinboard account. But I could see that being the foundation of this. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One thing I want to call out from this section on page 48, he says that we have to read with a pen in hand, develop ideas on paper, and build up an ever-growing pool of externalized thoughts. And when I read that, I thought of something that I've heard David Sparks say multiple times. It's like, I don't have a single unpublished thought.
Right.
And kind of when I read this in this book, I had that picture, but then also kind of made the connection that there's a system that allows you to do that. It's not as simple as just writing or talking into a microphone as we're doing right now about everything that pops into your head. The act of getting it into your Zettelkasten, whatever that happens to be,
right,
your slipbox, that is the thing that allows you to make those connections and make the not having a single unpublished thought be a positive instead of a negative, in my opinion.
Sure.
And it kind of challenged me to think through, because up until this point, I was kind of like, well, this sounds okay for academia, but I'm not really sure how much this can impact my own life. But then, I'm thinking through the launch stuff for faith-based productivity and all the things that I want to write. And I realized that it is really difficult for me to sit down with just a topic and just start writing. And I'm like, well, you really have nothing to lose at this point. You may as well give this a shot.
Right. That's exactly what my thought process was. That's why I have an action item of building one of these, because I know that I have a lot of ideas, and there's a lot of these that I feel like I want to share at some point, but I don't have a habit of sitting down and writing on a daily basis, which is what this would require.
Yep.
And if I were to build that in, it becomes a lot easier for me to find things that I can pull together and share, because and maybe we'll get into this a little bit about how to use this to get into the publishing piece, because there's a lot of value in pulling all this together, and it makes it very easy to take things and thoughts that you've developed over time and pull them together to create a paper. In our case, it would be creating a blog post or creating notes for a podcast or something. So I can see a lot of value in it. That's why I have an interest in it.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the next section here, let the work carry you forward, because I think if you're implementing this the right way, he's arguing that it becomes easier to do this. It's almost automatic. He talks about exergonic versus endergonic reactions. I think I'm saying that right. Exergonic equals you have to keep adding energy to keep the process going, whereas endergonic, the reaction, once you trigger it, it continues by itself and it even releases energy. So kind of the picture in my head as it pertains to writing is you sit down to write and you don't feel first of all, the intimidation of the blank page anymore. But as soon as you start writing, it actually gets easier to write. You build momentum through that instead of viewing it as, I've got so much willpower and I can only do this for an hour and then I'm going to be exhausted. He's arguing basically that if you're doing it right, you can keep going as long as you want to, because you're not running out of ideas and you're not running out of energy, but you need to have a good workflow which produces energy and doesn't consume it.
Yes, and I think this comes from the idea that you don't work on things you don't want to.
Yes.
He mentions that a handful of times of go where your mind wants to go. And if your mind wants to think about how to put together Linux on an Android phone and use it as a dumb phone, we won't talk about that here. If you want to think about that and write about it, go for it. But if that gets boring and you have an interest in writing about wings of airplanes, then go write about that. Wherever your mind goes that you have an interesting idea that you would like to write about, go with it. Don't be restricted. I think that's the concept he's getting at here, of just let it carry you and follow it, as opposed to what the general rule of thumb that people refer to in academia and in nonfiction writing and all those circles is, develop your idea and then put together your outline and then fill it in. That concept is completely out the window when you have something like this in place.
Yep. And I think, we can push back on the only go where your brain wants to go thing, because maybe because we're not in academia.
Right.
I don't know. But that one, I think people will struggle with. I know I struggled with it, but I also think that it doesn't negate the validity of some of the stuff that he's sharing in this section about the feedback loops. So there's a couple ways you can come at this. You could say, well, I'm not in academia, so I don't get to choose whatever I want to write about, whatever my brain happens to want to focus on. I have to write about X because that's my job. And that doesn't necessarily mean that this can't work for you. He talks in this section about the fixed versus growth mindset. And we've got a whole episode devoted to that. But the growth mindset views the obstacles as an opportunity instead of a roadblock. So kind of if you hit that writer's block, the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset, that's the thing that's going to get you over or keep you stuck. And I think that's a very important point that maybe is even underemphasized in this particular book. But the point that he's making is that growth mindset, that fuels a feedback loop. And the feedback loop is really powerful. That I totally understand how you could use that to gain momentum for whatever you are trying to do. If you're constantly feeling like you're stuck in your work, you're going to lose motivation. You're much more likely to procrastinate. That's kind of what he talks about. He talks about the good workflow, but also the feedback loop. What that does is once you get that going, it kind of keeps going. So I may experience some initial resistance when I sit down to write about topic X, but if my growth mindset is enough to push me forward and I start writing about topic X, and at the same time I'm reading and I'm starting to connect dots in a different way, I should be able to collect those things and put them in the queue so that I don't get stuck again. There should always be something next that is easy to transition into. And the feedback loop is going to make, when I get done with one article, now it's not just a sigh of relief, oh, finally I published that one. It's what do I get to do next? It's not what do I have to write next?
Sure.
What's the deadline that's coming up that I'm scared of? But I've got this momentum. I'm cranking out these words. The words are flowing. The ideas are connecting. I want to keep going. And that's a very important, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not really like a tipping point, but kind of. It's a very different approach, which can be the difference between, the snowball effect. Once you get a little bit of motion, you're going down the hill, like you can keep going, as opposed to you never even start.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good distinction to make, because it's just a matter of if you're into a specific area, just keep it going. But if you have to produce something, it would sure help to have a lot of ideas in that area.
Yes, yes.
But I think if you know, like, this is a mind game you're playing with yourself in some degree, in that you're trying to encourage yourself to write about a specific topic. And if you know that you've got to crank out a few articles on a specific topic or in a specific genre, you can kind of focus your brain towards those ideas, even if you have random thoughts on something completely different. Like, if you have the freedom to float with those, go with it. But if not, hopefully you're able to stick to it.
Right, yeah. Which, that's kind of a sad place to end up, where you just have to hope that stuff works.
Right.
So for me, as I'm reading through this, I kind of am inspired to figure out a way to make this work for myself. So I don't have to rely on that. And all the conditions have to be perfect and
sure,
things have to work out just right for me. But again, at this point in the book, you really don't know exactly how to do that if you're not using 3x5 index cards and a wooden recipe box.
Although that sounds really intriguing to me, I don't have any interest in analog hyperlinks. Like, just not for me.
Yeah, exactly. So, even Analog Joe is saying that's too analog for me.
No, not happening. No, I'll stick to text.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's about as far as you get, because in the next section, he talks about the 6 steps to successful writing, and they break it down into these different sections. And this is where you find out a lot about the different studies and things. There's some nuggets in here, but at this point, his explanation of the system is basically done, in my opinion.
I don't think it's an opinion. He's done. I don't know. So the 6 steps, let's just go through the 6 of them here. So separate and interlocking tasks. That's the name of the title. And as I flip through here, there are, let's see if I can grab the little subheadings underneath of this. So separate and interlocking tasks, that's the name of the title. But then he has 6 subsections there.
Mm-hmm.
Give each task your undivided attention. Multitasking is not a good idea. Give each task the right kind of attention. Become an expert instead of a planner. Get closure. Reduce the number of decisions. I'm not really sure how he got to those 6 subheadings off of separate and interlocking tasks. Maybe I'm just thinking about it wrong, but it felt very disconnected to me. A lot of these sections felt like they were just kind of pieced together. Thus, obviously he's writing this book using a slip box. He even calls that out at one point, and it's pretty obvious. It seems like there's a whole bunch of points where there's this cool story, which I'll give him that. He's good at telling these stories. But then it feels like he's pulling a bunch of random notes together to some degree and then trying to put a couple sentences that connect them. That's the way it felt. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but that was kind of my perception.
Well, this whole first chapter on separate and interlocking tasks, this read to me like a poor introduction to task management.
Oh, sure.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here that I have heard over and over and over again in the productivity world, and you could probably find something that I've written on every single one of these topics.
Yeah.
You know, we're multitasking. No one can truly multitask. What you're really doing is your context switching. He mentions Mihaly here on page 60.
That's a requirement, by the way.
Yep, exactly. He talks about how constant interruptions reduces your productivity by 40%, makes you at least 10 IQ points dumber. I mean, this is all stuff that we have heard multiple times. He does talk about the Zeigarnik effect in here, which his explanation of this I thought was pretty good. But again, it doesn't really fit with the system for collecting and connecting notes. It's just a general principle for how you would work regardless of the context. So maybe this is worth calling out real quickly because the essential idea of the Zeigarnik effect is that we don't have to complete the task to convince our brains that we don't need to think about it anymore. All we really need to do is write it down in a way that convinces our brains it's going to be taken care of later. And this is kind of why getting things done or GTD works. People have this system. You know, the secret to Mind Like Water is to get all that little stuff out of your short-term memory so your brain isn't trying to constantly go back to those things. But the slip box is not the place to keep your tasks in any arena, even in academia. Like, you're not going to keep track of the things that you need to write there, I think, unless, you know, because of my very limited knowledge of that world, maybe that is how it works, is you wake up in the morning and you say, I need to write something today. I'm just going to sit down and write whatever I feel like, you know. Maybe some people can do that, but I would say 98% of the people who are listening to this right now, that's not the way that they're going to work. They're going to need some sort of system. And that's kind of how I view this chapter, as an attempt to say, oh, well, see, I told you so, but really doesn't give you any specifics for how to do that.
Sure. Maybe his point is that if you're going to have a task of writing, focus on it. Maybe. I don't know.
I guess.
Maybe that's what he's getting at. I don't know. I struggled with it. That said, the next section, read for understanding, because I'm done with that one. I thought this was interesting. You know, taking notes on the books you're reading, taking notes on the articles and links and such, and then using those as jumping off points for your ideas, your permanent notes in the slip box or the Zettelkasten. Like, I thought that was kind of an interesting concept, and one that I really want to try to build out for myself.
Yeah, I liked this chapter, and not just because I felt like it supported the way that I take notes, but
it's kind of telling us, hey, you're doing good. So yeah, maybe that's why I liked it.
So on one level, obviously there is that piece of it, but I also think there's some interesting things here which I didn't really get before. One of the things that I thought was interesting was he mentioned that Charles Darwin used to force himself to write down and elaborate on the arguments that were the most critical of his theories. You know, forcing yourself to see things from the other perspective, I think that is a really powerful idea. He also mentions in here, get the gist. And he defines it as a skill. And as we develop that skill, reading becomes easier. You can grasp the gist quicker. You can read more in less time. You can more easily spot patterns and improve your understanding of them. And along the way, you increase your set of thinking tools. This is the part that I viewed as kind of like validation for the way that I do things, because I've seen this in my own life. I have had people who I show how I take notes. And I even have a post written up on this on my website. So I'll put the link in the show notes for anybody who's interested in this. But the too long didn't read version is that I take notes in my note on my phone while I am reading a physical book. And I have had people who look at the MindNote files that I create for a book, and they think, oh my gosh, that must have taken you like 20 hours to get through that book and make those notes. But it doesn't. It takes almost the same amount of time as it used to take me just to get through the book.
Sure.
Like
sure.
I don't know how to explain it until I read this section, but I just recognized like these are the things that I should be writing down. I'm not trying to write down everything. I'm not trying to recreate the book or even the main ideas of the book, but I am getting better at recognizing the things that are going to be important to me later. And he defines that as the gist.
Yeah, and I think there's some value in the concept of determining what the gist is, because one thing he does call out in a number of places, repeats it over and over, is that you should not be quoting books and quoting the things that you read. You should be taking the idea of what they're saying, boiling it down to the gist of that area, and then putting it into your own words.
Yep.
You know, how many times did your teacher say, no, don't say what they said, say it your own way. Use your own words to do it. And by doing that, it forces a few things. It forces you to understand it yourself a little bit better. It's the classic concept of if you want to learn something, teach it. It's that idea.
Yeah.
You're basically teaching yourself because of what you've read.
Yep. Yeah, I have an interesting story about this, which I believe explains why I've kind of resisted this subconsciously. I maybe have told this story on the podcast before, so I apologize if I have. But when I was a freshman in college, I was in an intro to theology class at a Catholic university, and I was doing very well in the class. And then at the end of the semester, my teacher called me to the office because we had a book report that we were supposed to do. And apparently I had not cited things correctly. And she said that I had plagiarized the book report, which I hadn't. I just didn't cite it correctly, I guess. And she was going to take me to academic court, and I was potentially going to get kicked out of school. And basically that rocked my world. And I said, I didn't plagiarize the paper, and I am sorry, if I didn't cite things correctly, I'll take the blame for that one. Although maybe at that point I didn't say I'd take the blame for that one, but I don't know. Anyways, she didn't end up taking me to academic court, but she did give me a 0 on the paper, and it was worth a 6 of our grade. So I went from an A to a C in that one
Wow.
book report.
Wow.
One book report. Literally read the book and write about it. So anything that I'm going to quote, exactly where it's coming from.
Right.
And I didn't realize until we were at, I think it was Macstock a couple of years ago, and we were getting coffee, and somebody had mentioned to me, like, you've been around this space long enough. You've made your own interpretation of these ideas. You've connected these dots for yourself. It's okay to have this be your thing. Like, you don't have to give credit for every single idea you've ever had. And really in this section, what he's saying, you just said, is like, he wants you to, as you're taking these notes, think through things and put your own spin on them. And I guess like I've been doing that, but I've also been at the same time reluctant to take credit for doing that. So this is somebody in academia telling me essentially the exact opposite of what my intro to theology teacher told me my freshman year of college. It's like, no, this is okay.
Now, the next piece here is Take Smart Notes, which I felt was a cop-out of a title, since it's the title of the book.
Right.
This section, he's basically making the case for everything he's made the case for.
Yes.
And explains how it's important to think outside your brain. And, you just need to stick with it and do a few notes every day. And that whole premise, that's what he's getting at here. Use the system.
I do think it's interesting to, like that you mentioned, take a few notes every day. That's kind of like, just show up and write a page every day, which is how I wrote my book. So I think this is kind of interesting in terms of lead versus lag measures. I view it as like previously I had the measure of I'm going to show up and I'm going to write a page every day. But if you're going in collecting ideas and you really believe in the system that he's outlining here, the writing takes care of itself, then it's almost like a no-brainer. All I have to do is collect a couple different ideas every day to my Slipbox. I can totally do that, And I think that maybe reduces the friction for people if they approach it that way. I do agree with you that this is kind of a weak section. There are a couple things that were interesting to me here. Number one, the 2 different factors of memory. He talks about storage strength, which actually gets stronger with age, but retrieval strength does not, and that requires the right cues, which is interesting because you kind of think like you get older, your memory goes, but really what he's saying is that the retrieval strength, if you have the right cues in place, then there's no reason that your system of filing things and then recalling them has to diminish in its capability. The other thing is that he mentions make a career one note at a time. I forget if this is the title of a whole section, but this appealed to me because I feel like I've kind of done this.
Yeah.
I don't want to retell my whole story, but I really had no entryway into this world, and I just started collecting ideas. That Austin Kleon book that I know I've mentioned a bunch of different times on this in this podcast, Steal Like an Artist, that was really influential for me. It gave me permission to collect things and just be okay with the natural output. And then that kind of led to me writing the book, led to me getting connected to lots of different places, people like you, Joe. Like, I never would have got there had I not embraced that idea of just collect the dots. He says it a little bit different, make a career one note at a time. But I guess I just want to say, like, I'm a case study for the fact that this is possible.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value to sticking with the system a little bit at a time. And he has, like, the last section here is make it a habit, so we'll refer to it there. But I do want to go into the next section here of develop ideas, because I think this is where he probably should have spent a decent amount of time. He should have spent, obviously I'm critiquing this book quite hard, but he should have spent some time very explicitly explaining the system, and then go through some of the tips, like I get the principles process, and then take us through the developing ideas. Like, what are some of the philosophies around developing ideas? And essentially what he's getting at here is that you need to spend some time with all of these notes, try to make connections, create links between things, figure out what's going on between them, change, alter, rewrite the ideas that you have already written. Just continue to work with the system. And basically what you're doing is you're taking time to develop, obviously, your ideas, your thoughts, and over time, that can become something that can then become published later on. So this section I kind of wish would actually have been a little bit longer, but at the same time, I'm quite comfortable with him keeping it brief.
Sure. Yeah, this section kind of makes the this is where he starts to explain how these things can fit together. And I don't know if it was the way that he explained it or just, at this point in the book, my brain went this place. But I recently heard about this new Mac app. I'm going to send you this via messages so you can take a look at this.
Okay.
All right. This is an app called Hook, and it's basically for creating links to different things and different screens and different applications on your Mac. So you can say, I want to be able to get back to this specific spot in this specific application. You run it through Hook, and you've got a link now, a URL that will take you exactly there. So it's kind of like iOS deep linking, I guess. And I haven't really played with this a whole lot, But as I was thinking along the way about what does the Slipbox look like and what is the app that I'm going to be using for this, I thought of this app and I'm like, maybe you don't need to have just one app for this sort of thing. Maybe the future of digital slip boxes is something like this, where you can just link to whatever section of whatever you need and connect those things that way. Again, I haven't played with this a whole lot, but I'm interested in the idea of at any point in any application being able to very quickly get a URL and stick that somewhere in a digital slip box. I think that there's a lot of power in that, and that probably even works a lot better than some of the keywords and the tags that we were talking about earlier.
Sure. No, I think that's an interesting point to make. I'm very familiar with Hook. We'll need to have an offline conversation about them after this. I've got a connection to the company that makes it. So I haven't spent any time with it, but I know a lot about it. I hadn't really thought about it this way, but now that you've mentioned this app, it makes me realize that a lot of the files and such that I want to use for this, like that whole plain text structure I'm contemplating for this, it really just needs to have the ability to store links.
Yeah.
No matter how you do this, if you're going to do it digitally, I've already kind of alluded to this with the pinboard thing without realizing it. Like having links that go places, that could be huge. Now, my concern with something like Hook is that what happens if those things move?
Yes, exactly.
That's the trick with that. So, Not sure how it handles that. Again, I've not used it, so I can't speak to that. But it is of a lot of interest to me.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this idea because he makes the statement here, and I've heard this before, when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And really what he's talking about when he says that is developing the mental models that you need to tackle creative problems. But I also think that applies to, as I'm reading this book, how I would assemble my slipbox. It's very easy to say, oh, I need a Zettelkasten because I need to be able to have the numbering system in the upper left and do it exactly the same way.
Sure.
That would be the letter of the How to Take Smart Notes law. But the spirit of it is just being able to connect these things, right? So maybe there's different and better ways to do that. That kind of gets into the Royal Air Force story, which I really like this story. This was the first time I'd heard this, but this is awesome. Do you remember this story?
I do, but I want you to tell it.
Okay. So basically, the Royal Air Force wanted to put reinforcement in their planes to where they were being shot. And so they asked this guy, Abraham Wald, to find out where they were most frequently shot. And so they had all these planes that came back with bullet holes in them, and the Royal Air Force wanted to add armor where those bullet holes were. But Abraham Wald said, no, you want to add it to everywhere where those aren't, because those are the areas where the planes got hit that didn't make it back.
So brilliant to think of it that way. It's like all the ones that, didn't make it back are the ones that got hit in the fuel tank. Well, you need to reinforce the fuel tank.
Yeah, the returning planes could only show the data that was less relevant, basically. So being able to see things through a different perspective, not being locked into this is the only way to approach a solution to this problem, I think is really important. And I don't know that Hook is the way to do that, but I do think that for me personally, the digital application of the Slipbox requires some modifications to what we just read in this book.
Sure. Now, the next section here is share your insight. And this is where he explains the process of developing an outline based on the ideas that are already in your Slipbox, taking those and then pulling it all together in order to create an article, a paper, a book. Like that's what he goes through. And it's that particular section that tipped me off, because he also mentioned in that section that this is how he wrote this book, which then puts a whole new light on the disconnectedness of certain areas. Not all of it is, but there's a lot of pieces where it's like, I think you just wanted to talk about multitasking. I think you just wanted to talk about it. And there were a handful of areas that were similar to that. Like, I think you just wanted to talk about groupthink and brainstorming. Like, I think you just wanted to. So whenever he mentions that he uses his Slipbox to do this, like one of the things in this area that maybe I would clarify based on his process is that it should probably be something that you spend a little more time in the editing room in that process before you publish it, because obviously I don't think he did that well with this book. That's just my opinion. We'll get to author style and rating later. Maybe I gave it away already. But again, the intent of the book is to share what you've done.
Yeah.
And that's what he's getting at here.
Yeah. To be honest, these last two chapters, I think, were some of the weakest. The one thing I got from this chapter was that we tend to prioritize certain ideas, and that doesn't necessarily make them better. He has a quote from Charlie Munger. It says, "An idea or fact is not worth more because it is easily available to you." And he mentions that your brain prioritizes that information that's easily accessible in the moment, but that does not mean that it's relevant. And also, getting back to the Rolf Dabali book that we read, blanking on the name, but all the different like biases that people can have. We tend to prefer the first idea best. And so that kind of is a challenge to me, just because you've thought about something for a little bit and you've gotten a potential solution doesn't mean that you should run with that. Maybe think a little bit more and see if you can come up with some other ideas, because that first one is typically not the best. And I think if you just devote a little bit more time to noodling on these things, then maybe some of those things become clear, just because you give your brain the space to identify those. The
Art of Thinking Clearly.
There it is. Yep.
I had to hunt it down. It's like at some point you get so many books underneath of you, it starts to get hard to pinpoint exactly who wrote what sometimes.
Right.
So, last section here is make it a habit. And this is where that concept of, spend a little bit of time writing notes each day. Like, that's where that gets important. And if you are setting goals, or just setting time for how much time you're going to spend in your slip box, or how many notes are you going to try to create each day, or edit each day, or publish each day, like, it's important to create the flow and the regularness of spending time inside these notes.
Yep. Yeah, I don't think we need to really spend any time here, because there are other books that explain habits way better than this one does.
Action items?
Yeah.
Are we there?
I think so. All right. So I'll go first. I'm going to change my approach to writing, but I am not going to go full on with his system. I've started doing this, and I'm going to try to explain this in audio format. It's probably not going to make that much sense, but I'll try to outline the essential pieces and how they tie together. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm going to be doing a lot more writing, hopefully, and I'm trying to figure out what is the system that I can use to do that, to make it easier. And the first part of that has always been to capture ideas in drafts, and that part is not going to change. I've kicked around the idea of tagging things in drafts, because you can do that, but I think that drafts for me is just the collection point. I'm not going to put tags on them there. From there, I can decide what things I want to write more on, and this is where a new app that I've been playing with comes into play, and that is Notion. Notion is a pretty cool database application, I guess is how you would explain it. A lot of people view it as like an Evernote replacement. It is not an Evernote replacement at all. It can function as an Evernote replacement, but that is definitely not doing it justice. Just as an example, one of the things that I've done with Notion, and I am very, very new to this application and not even scratching the surface with it, I created a section for the content that I wanted to create for my blogs, my emails, and also the podcasts that we publish. So I created that section, and then I created a Kanban view, which was as simple as a couple mouse clicks, set up the columns, assigned colors to each of them, and now I've got a Kanban view for all of the things that are in the backlog, things that I want to write, things that I am writing, things that are published or done. And also I can assign whatever properties I want to those things. So one of the easy ones I did was story points. If you wanted to break it down in individual sprints, you could do that sort of thing too. But also from that section, you can go click to create a new view and then select a calendar view. And now all of the things that are on my Kanban board and the dates that I want them to be published on now show up on a calendar. And they show whatever I want on there, including the story points. So how big is this task really? Is it just a quick little blog post saying, hey, there's a new Bookworm episode that's published today, click here to listen? Or is it something that I want to spend some time researching and writing? So I can see story points, I can see the status of the thing. Have I started it or not? It's pretty cool. And the thing that I think Notion is really going to help with, and this is something I need to dig into more, is the interlinking. So you can have all of these different sections, all these different places. I could literally have a section in Notion of all the different research papers that have popped up in these books that we've read. And I could link to those in any of the other sections. So it's kind of like building a wiki, but not really. Again, Notion is kind of its own animal.
Sure. It's its own thing.
Yeah, but it makes the interlinking of things and ideas very, very easy. And so I think I need to put a little bit more thought into like the types of things that I want to collect in there, whether they end up as keywords or just separate spaces. But then ultimately those tasks or those things that I create in my Kanban board, I can even link to the Ulysses sheet. Ulysses is where I do all of the writing. Notion is where I kind of organize everything. And Drafts is where everything is going to be collected on the front end. At least that is the initial thought.
I like it. Though I've not played with Notion, so I have no concept of that particular app. But I know that I've listened to you and a couple other people refer to Notion in the last couple of days. Like, it seems like a really cool tool. I'm just stuck in the plain text world.
Yeah.
So I think it could be a really cool thing for you. I think it's just something I'm not going to do, though.
Yep, that's fine. But I also want to say that if people are going to go look at Notion and try to figure it out, you won't be able to just by downloading and launching the app. You really have to have like a specific use case that you're trying to build. And if you have that, then it's pretty easy to make Notion do whatever you want. But that was a problem I had the first time was everybody's talking about this. I better go look at it. I'm like, I don't even know what to do here. There's no wizard which is going to walk me through things because you can literally do anything with it. You can build your own applications inside of it. It's crazy.
Which I think is why a lot of people refer to Notion as like an Evernote comparison. Because with that, like with Evernote, it was hard to get into it because it was so open-ended. Like, you could do a lot of things with it, and it made it hard to nail down what you should be doing with it or how you wanted to use it.
True.
Notion kind of reminds me of that.
Yeah, I could see that. Although Notion is way more powerful than Evernote, so maybe that to the nth degree. I mean, I just saw a tweet the other day that Gantt charts are coming to Notion, which again is just a view of the things that are already in there. So you don't need to go in there and try to figure out how to put all these things on the Gantt chart. You just put the work that you're doing in there, and then you click the button and it shows up in a Gantt chart. Sure. It is crazy powerful.
Very interesting. Well, don't count on me using Notion. But you're
going to be using Zettelkasten.
I do. I am not using Zettelkasten. Heavens no. No. But I do want to build out a Slipbox, a Zettelkasten, and obviously, like I've alluded to this a handful of times, I am planning to do so in plain text files. I already have a Git repository where I store a lot of notes and reference, so I'll just build it into that, which is nice because then it means that, like, again, I can use Drafts as well as the starting point if I want. And for me, it means that I can put things into working copy on my phone, commit it to the repo, and then pull it back down wherever I want, and I'm good to go. So that makes it very easy for me to just have the single point. Again, it's all plain text files. But the piece that I got to nail down is how do I want all the hyperlinking to work? Because obviously plain text does not hyperlink.
Right.
So there's a lot of ways that you can do that with Vim, a VI editor. But again, that's going to get into command line tools, and this is far from a Linux command line world that we're referring to here. So that said, I'll make an action item on the club for it, and all of my Vim people, please find me.
All right. Style and rating.
It's your book. You go first.
Okay. I actually didn't mind the style too much. The third section, I almost called it the second section because after the introduction, there really are only two sections. I definitely thought that was the weaker part of the book, and maybe it's just because I'm familiar with a lot of the stuff that he talked about already because it's kind of general productivity stuff. I do think that it inspired some cool changes to my writing workflow and made me think about how I write a little bit differently. I was really intrigued by the exergonic versus energonic reactions and kind of like how can I make my writing workflow kind of automatic. So I feel like this is going to be one of those books that is going to have a significant impact in the way that I work. That being said, it's not really something I would recommend to people. I think it solves a very specific problem if you approach it a certain way. And so for some people, this might be the right book at the right time. I kind of think maybe it was for me. I think that some of the things that he and explanations that he uses are kind of dry. I know that there's a little bit of a language barrier there. I don't know if the author is German, but if you watch the video, you can kind of tell that it sounds like English isn't his primary language, and that kind of comes across in some of the writing as well. I'm kind of torn as to where to rate this. I think I'm going to rate it 3.5. And that's because I think that I got some solid stuff out of it, but it was definitely at certain points a slog to get through. Not one of the better books I would say that we've written, but over time I could see this book being one of the most impactful. Like I come back to this and, How to Take Smart Notes, that was the point where writing got a whole lot easier for me.
Yeah, I think that sometimes happens because, what was it? How to Read a Book, Mortimer. Neither one of us really cared for the book, but it's had an impact on both of us. And it's honestly one of our more popular episodes, oddly enough. So I think this is going to fall into that. Obviously, if you've listened to this whole thing, you know that I'm not a huge fan of the format of this. Like, I felt like he was skimping and then trying to expand. Like, it was just weird to me. So I struggled with it. I struggled with how he put it together. I struggled with how he edited it. I found a lot of typos and grammatical errors, which really bothered me after the first probably 10 that I found. It seemed like about every second or third page I found something on it that was off. It's like, come on. It's like, and they did put the editor's name at the front, so it's like, okay, well, now I know who I'm not using.
Yeah.
So, sorry to say all of that, but that all said, I think, like, this one's hard for me because I think I'm with you in that the idea, I think, is super important and can have a huge impact. It could have exponential impact long term, but I do think that the book itself, I really, really struggle with. There's a website, zettelkasten.de. It's actually in English that I ran across in the process of trying to figure out this system in a little bit more. It's written by, what's the guy's name? Christian, can't find his last name. Christian and Sasha. They do a fantastic job of explaining the system and how it works, and even show how it can work in tools like NVAlt. NVAlt's actually one that they absolutely love. Christian even submitted some changes to NVAlt on behalf of Brett a couple times. So that endeared me a little bit more towards him. So my thinking on this is I'm going to rate this at 2.5. I'm sorry to say that. Mostly because the system's really cool, but there are much better ways to get it.
Yeah.
And this book is not worth going through in order to get to that point. I don't think it's well done. I just don't.
Yeah, if I had found that other guide, maybe I would have rated it lower.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe that's the problem that I'm doing here is I did compare Christian and Sasha's writing to Sönke's, and I much prefer the website version of it. So that's the downside of that. But that's where I'm going to land.
I think that's completely fair. And I did not know there were other options for the same information. But if there's a better option, I wholeheartedly endorse going there instead. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. So if people are hearing us talk about this, they're interested in further study, but they don't necessarily want to pick up how to take smart notes, then they can check that out first.
Something of interest to me is like, okay, this was by far the top voted book in the recommendations on the club.
Well, it's a fascinating topic.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that has to do with just the title.
Yeah, true.
So I don't know how much of that is people are voting it because they know of the book and what it's about, and how much of that is how to take smart notes. Like, whenever we were picking this book up, I was super excited to get it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little disappointed right now, but
I can literally see the disappointment on your face.
Yeah, yeah. But the title is intriguing, so yeah, I could see how it got there.
Cool. All right, what's next, Joe?
Next one up is my pick, Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. I feel like this one's been a long time coming, and we've talked a lot about how to improve Carol Dweck's mindset of, whole growth mindset. This kind of takes that to a little bit different level, I think, with how do you improve and get better with your emotional state, not just your intellectual state.
Yeah, this is a topic that I know a little bit about, probably just enough to make me dangerous, but not enough to really be of any use. So I'm interested to see your reaction to a lot of the books that we've read after we go through this, because I feel like a lot of the authors that we read about, they touch on the topic of emotional intelligence. I talk about it way too much, I know.
Sure.
But it does influence a lot of different areas. So this will be interesting.
Yeah, I think it'll be a fun one.
The one after that is the next recommendation in the Bookworm Club. You guys have gone nuts voting for this one. This is Free to Focus by Michael Hyatt. And I basically am picking this because of the number of votes that it has gotten. I have to confess, this is not something that I'm itching to read. Although I've read Michael Hyatt's stuff before, and I think he's a good writer. I also tend to not like the systems, and Michael Hyatt tends to write systems. So we will see. Hopefully I will be pleasantly surprised. I have not gotten this yet.
I am still holding you on the hook if I don't like it.
All right. Well, hold the club on the hook if you don't like it.
All right. Fun times. Gap Books. I finished up a book that I was reading at night, and I just picked up a new one. This is kind of a classic. Well, not kind of a classic. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It's Charles Dickens.
Enough said.
That's all I need to say.
Mic drop. Yep. The one I'm still reading because we hustled to get this one done so we could record this live while you were here. I'm still reading Company of One by Paul Jarvis. And actually, I've just started this because I kind of switched my focus to this book instead. But Company of One is interesting. He's basically making the argument that growth should not be the default option for companies. And I think that's an interesting mindset that kind of flies in the face of a lot of the stuff that we read.
Yeah.
So, but he's done it. He's built a successful company and not a huge company. So
Sure.
I'm interested to, and he's a very good writer. The first chapter has been really entertaining. So I'm excited to get through the rest of this one. And I will mention that the notes that I've taken, the MindNode files for both this book and Company of One are both going to be in the Bookworm Club, the premium membership. So members are going to be able to get access to those.
Yeah, and I also want to point out that we've been going through a lot of listener recommendations lately. Just kind of picking out some of the high ones. I actually when I picked Quiet, I didn't realize it was on the recommendations list, but it was. So that was unintentional. But yeah, we've been picking a lot of books off of that list. So if you have one that you want to get in the running for showing up on the show, go to club.bookworm.fm/recommend, or just go to the club. There's a big button at the top that says recommend a book. Click on it. That's the easy way to do it. From there, you can also see all of the books that are currently recommended. Make sure you get your votes in. If you get your votes in, obviously, the higher it is, the better chance there is for it to show up on the show. So you can see all of the books that are on the recommendation list. You can see all the episodes. That's the easy place to see it all.
All right. And if you want to support the show, there's a couple ways that you can do that. Number one, you can join the revolution. Go over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Help us take down KCRW. Thank you to everybody who has done that. You can also buy a Bookworm t-shirt. We get a couple bucks from every one of those sales, and you can join the Bookworm Club. We've got a premium membership, which gets you access to a wallpaper that I designed, the book notes from all of the books that we read, and then, as we mentioned at the beginning, we're experimenting with this live recording. So we will potentially have the ability, by the time we record the next show, if you are a Bookworm Club premium member, to listen to the show live, hear all of the mistakes that we make before we edit the thing.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
And join the chat as we record, ask questions, things like that. Kind of scary, what that's gonna look like, but it's also kind of exciting. I've done that before with Asian Efficiency, and I'm kind of excited to see what people think as we're talking about this stuff live. I think that might result in a lot better conversation, a lot more complete conversation. So if you want to be a part of that, make sure that you join, because we're going to share that link, but it's going to be in a private section of the Bookworm Club.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I think it'll be a lot of fun. But I also want to note, we're obviously here in the room together today, and that's been a process of us working together on Mike's site, Faith-Based Productivity. So I just want to point out, keep your eyes on that. That thing's coming out very soon. Mike's looking at me kind of funny because he doesn't want me to talk about this, but I'm doing it anyway. It's something that I think I'm getting involved in it to some degree, and I think it's going to be really cool. So it's something I have a lot of interest in as well. So yeah, keep your eyes on what Mike's doing right now. It's really cool.
Cool. Well, thank you for that.
All right, now I'll quit doing that now. So if you're interested in emotional intelligence, we'll catch that one next time. So pick up the book and read it along with us.